Bush and Housing Ministry, Ms. Heather Bodden, Deputy Minister of Tourism and Development, Edward Howard, Director of the National Roads Authority, and Ms. Jeannie Banks-Petrie, Director of the Department of Environment. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Thank you for coming to our meeting. As you see, there's some maps all around the room of the East-West Arterial extension. They're close-ups of the individual sections of 2 and 3, which have been placed all the way around the room. We hope you had a chance to review those. The NRA have commissioned the Environmental Impact Assessment, the EIA, of the East-West Arterial Extension, and WAR, the group here in front of us, are the specialist consultants who are undertaking that study. Just to remember, the public meetings provide an opportunity for the NRA and the Environmental Impact Assessment consultants to provide more information on the EIA terms of reference, and for members of the public, which is you, to ask questions during the consultation period. The panel are going to provide and deliver a presentation, which will take about an hour, and then we'll have your questions and answers. The project, the written comments can be made using comment cards, or we'll ask for comments if you raise your hand at the end of the evening. Written comments are also available doe@gov.ky, so please email doe@gov.ky, and the meeting will close at 9 o'clock. Note that I'm here as a neutral moderator to facilitate the respectful discussion and do not represent either organization. And then again, I just want to point out to you that most importantly tonight is about the Environmental Impact Assessment Study. That's what your question should be focused on. We are not discussing whether the road should be built or not be built. That is not a discussion of this evening. It's specifically about the Environmental Impact Assessment. Right now, I'd like to invite Mr. Edward Howard, Director of National Roads Authority, to come up and make a few comments.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Jay. And I just want to welcome you all to the second of our meetings dealing with the terms of reference for the East-West Arterial extension. I want to say that Tuesday's meeting was we feel was very fruitful. We got a lot of really good feedback from people on both sides of the argument. So we want to invite you again tonight to do the same. Please feel free to ask as many questions as you need to so that you can feel comfortable about what we have to say. You can leave here well informed. So that's really, one additional thing I want to say is that we will be looking at this not just from a transportation standpoint, traffic standpoint, but obviously we want to be able to assess the environmental impact. So you will hear a lot of terms tonight about air quality, noise, greenhouse gases, all these types of things, and biodiversity. I got a few comments after Tuesday's meeting. A lot of people were saying, well, ooh, there was a lot of information, a lot of terms we'd never ever heard before. And so that really leads me to implore you all to make sure that it's settled in your mind what some of these terms and terminologies are, because these are all in their own right experts in their respective fields. But we want to make sure that the information that we're imparting to you is fully understood. So so with that, I think I think we'll proceed with the presentation. So thank you all.
Thank you, sir. And of course, we just want to get through this as quickly as possible so that we can have enough time for your questions and answers at the end. So let me just introduce Denny Thibault, the Assistant Director of Transport and Planning for the unit, and he can introduce the rest of the panel for us. Thank you.
Okay. Well, good evening, everybody. I'll just have a brief introduction about what the project is very quickly. The East-West Arterial Corridor was initially conceived and gazetted back in May 2005, about 8 months after Hurricane Ivan, when we were affected by it. That was done under Section 26 of the Roads Law, which is essentially a long-term projection of road corridors, which under a development plan could make provision for that. The corridor is divided into 2 sections. Section 2 is from Woodland Drive to Lookout Gardens, and Section 3 is from Lookout Garden to Frankstown Road. It terminates about a quarter mile north of Botanic Road. In general, the alignment of the corridor hugs the southern edge of the central mangrove system, which a lot of it is in private ownership. The length of the proposed corridor involves about 10 miles of road. The width of the road, the right-of-way for the corridor, that's not pavement, is about 160 feet. It's a multimodal, multi-use corridor that can accommodate multiple lanes of road, including bicycle lanes and/or dedicated bus lane if necessary, utility corridors such as power, communication, drainage conveyance, and potentially, if it ever comes to that, sanitary sewer. Over the years, there's been several attempts by government to indicate that they would go forward. And in last year, in 2021, government asked the NRA to formally request that we approach a environmental assessment board to have a scoping opinion for the proposed road corridor. That scoping opinion was issued by the environmental assessment board in November 2021. As a result of that, we prepared the tender document, and that was made public in March 2022. The firm Whitman Record and Associate was awarded the contract for carrying on the EI back in August 2022. So with the draft terms of reference, the reason we're here today is to discuss the draft terms of reference for the study. That means the various components that will be assessed and studies and assessment that we'll do, which the NRA are proposing to be carried out to identify the direct, indirect, and cumulative effect on the natural and developed environment. Yep. The purpose of the road is to provide a disaster resilient transportation network to connect the eastern and western districts, recognizing the impact of Hurricane Ivan in September 2004, create a central alternative road to the coastal road, such as Bordentown and Shamrock, 2 roadways with several intersections and numerous driveways, 1 lane in each direction, and ease traffic congestion along Bordentown and Shamrock, which has seen continual growth over the last 15 years. The needs identified for the road is the effect of climatic events and sea level rises along the coast road of Bordentown Road, lack of alternate road to Bordentown and Shamrock connecting the eastern and western district, reduce the frequency of congestion along Bordentown and Shamrock Road. So at the moment, this is a consultation. This is the first step. This is consultation to get your input, looking at what we're proposing for the study and get your input on that. If there are elements that we haven't covered, we solicit your comments and summations. Later on, once the terms of reference are finalized, we will come back to the various stakeholders that include National Trust, Sustainable Cayman, various communities that will be affected by this road corridor. So the assessment of the AI will cover at a minimum the following: route alignment and assessment of alternatives, socioeconomic consideration, the hydrology and drainage, geo-environmental, terrestrial ecology, cultural and natural heritage sites, greenhouse and gas emissions, and noise and vibration. And on that note, I'll pass it on to my next speaker, which is Lindsay Ulizio.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. For this portion of the presentation, we are going to discuss the highway design and the traffic analysis engineering. So if you look here in the left-hand side, you can see an aerial helicopter bird's eye view of October 2019 westbound direction. This is during the AM peak period. You can see this is along Shamrock and Bordentown Road near Hearst Road, and the queue extends even farther east. We've also had the privilege today to be up in the helicopter once again to see the morning peak period and to see just how far back the queue extends, which appears to be even farther back than what I had witnessed back in 2019 when I took those photos as well. So here we're to discuss the roadway alignment alternatives and the analysis as we continue to look at the projected anticipated future growth, what that means with the population, what does that mean for your roadway infrastructure system. So from the eastern, going back and forth between the eastern districts and the central and western districts, your options that you currently have and what you could have for the future. So As Denny had said, for the focus, so this is not just building a roadway. This is to discuss many different components of what the purpose of this would potentially be. For example, providing a disaster resilient alternative route, meeting the existing and the projected multimodal travel needs through improved traffic conditions. We're not just discussing trying to move cars from point A to point B, but we're trying to discuss moving people and goods as a whole more efficiently and more safely throughout your roadway infrastructure and your network. We also do not want to undermine, we want to preserve the unique environment of Grand Cayman. So we want to look at all aspects as well as provide an enriched quality of life through improved mobility and accessibility for residents and visitors alike for all modes of transportation. With that being said, during this process, we will have an alternatives evaluation in which we will look at 3 primary alternatives that are listed here. However, I would like to caveat that these alternatives will have subsections to them. We can make refinements and tweaks based off of public comments on what are the optimal solutions to have a balanced proposed solution. So here, number 1 is the do nothing alternative, which includes previously established projects such as the east-west arterial section between Hearst Road and Agricola Drive. The second alternative, primary alternative, would be the east-west arterial expansion that includes all of the committed projects as well as the extension all the way out to Frank Sound Road. The third would be the Shamrock Road and Boddentown Road alternative. This would include all of the committed projects as well as any necessary design, safety, and/or operational improvements needed to meet the purpose and need of this project. So let's take a minute and hone in on step 3, the alternatives evaluation of looking and identifying a preferred alternative, in which, as Denny had said, you will then have public consultation once we come up and refine and give you objective benefits and costs for these alternatives, what seems to be the best balanced optimal solution for you. As you can see here, we have sustainability measures as well as performance metrics that we use to qualitatively and quantitatively measure the different alternatives against one another to determine what is the optimal balance solution. So for example, some sustainability measures include the cost effectiveness in both short and long-term life cycles, the environmental and natural resource conservation, in which we reserve the water quality, the air quality, and which they're being conserved, protected, or enhanced, as well as the ease of implementation, how it can be done under existing operating conditions and circumstances, and also the community context, with preserving the local and regional community of the public of moving goods and people safely and efficiently, as well as you have travel time, which everybody can relate to, travel time, back of queues, fuel consumption, which all can be relatable and measurable, as well as land use accessibility. How long does it take you to get to jobs, healthcare, grocery stores, etc.? So then we want to look at step 4, the possible engineering and environmental factors that are included in this screening process. The ability to minimize the removal of unusable materials, to reduce the aggregate volume needed to construct the new road, and to address areas in need of pedestrian and bicyclist crossings and the wildlife passage, and also reduce direct and indirect impacts to the protected areas. And with that, we would develop a summary of the anticipated impacts. As you can see here, you have the different alternatives. We look at many different components, such as the socioeconomic impacts, hydrology, cultural and natural heritage, greenhouse, noise, and traffic. So we can quantitatively look at all of these different components and measure them to determine benefit cost analysis for each of these alternatives to once again see what may be the best balance optimal solutions. An example here, and I just would like to caveat so nobody gets excited too quickly, would be the number of lanes. I know you see 3 lanes in each direction. That may startle you. You're not wanting to see this full build out like this. This is just an example. This is a typical section example in which you would see in the documentation to help understand the purpose of each lane and the usage of it. So for example, through this process, we will evaluate the alternatives to determine what is actually needed for the anticipated population and traffic growth within the area. Is it a dedicated bus lane with 2 travel lanes, etc.? So this is just an example of what the roadway system may look like depending on our analysis of our findings. Here you can see this is an example of Hearst Road at the east-west arterial, the roundabout. Currently, you can see it's a T intersection, stop controlled, which we can transform the roundabout configuration to a considered design such as a bow tie roundabout to minimize right-of-way impacts. This is an example of how an intersection could be transformed to have more accommodations and amenities. And finally, this is a third example in which you can have a roundabout that has the multimodal accessibility for all modes of transportation. As you can see, you have pedestrian and cyclist crossings, as well as far side bus stops as well, bus pull-offs. So you're capturing all multimodal accessibility here in these roundabout designs. As part of the traffic analysis component of this process, this would feed into the highway design to determine the optimal solutions to meet the purpose and need of this project, to take a holistic perspective of the project for mobility benefits and impacts to be determined and evaluated for each alternative. We're going to look at future years of 2026, 2036, and 2046 for alternatives. We are also going to use the most recent census and socioeconomic data for each district to forecast future anticipated traffic volumes. And when we were looking at this, we did notice that there is substantial growth within some of the districts as well. And we're using that data to really hone in to forecast these traffic volumes to see what the roadway infrastructure and what the conditions would be like. So with evaluating these three primary alternatives that I had just discussed, I had also mentioned the necessary refinements that could be potential possibilities, such as determining number of lanes for each roundabout or the number of lanes on the section of roadway. May not have to be 3 lanes in each direction, but that is what we are going to analyze to look at what is needed. Turn bay lengths at intersections, number of through lanes, as I said, and intersection configurations that I had showed you, the different options to encompass not just moving cars, but all modes of transportation and moving goods and people efficiently and safely. So with that, here is a chart of the overall multimodal transportation model flow. We're going to be using our evaluation tool set as part of the evaluation process to fully screen and vet the different alternatives to come up with the performance metrics that can be used to determine the optimal solutions. So here you can get down to the nitty-gritty with detailed metrics or higher level screening metrics to quantifiably be able to compare the alternatives together. And before I close with my portion, I just wanted to mention that even though we are focused on the east-west extension this evening, currently the NRA is diligently working towards implementing roadway and infrastructure improvements between the Tomlinson roundabouts and the Bobby Thompson Way area, so that I know there may be some concern about if you have an additional roadway, you're just going to have all the traffic flow flood to the existing bottlenecks. Here to say that the NRA is diligently working to ensuring that we have mitigation and we have the traffic flow and we're able to improve travel conditions farther west, so that if in case this does become an option that you all think is the best solution, you would be able to have traffic flow and not have pinch points, hopefully downstream. So with that, I would like to pass that on to Kim.
Hi, good evening. Now that Lindsay talked about the alternatives, I'd like to explain how we're going to study the environmental effects of these alternatives. We have basically we're trying to figure out how large the area should be that we're studying. We come up with the study area that's shown in the red dashed rectangle on the screen, and that's based on starting with the direct impacts, the direct footprint of the construction of the roadway, which would be shown with the green and the purple lines. Many environmental impacts are based directly on that, wetland direct impacts, but then many impacts such as noise and other items are a certain buffer from that direct impact area. So each resource has a specific area it looks at. And then further beyond that, we want to study the indirect and cumulative effects of this project. So what could potentially happen should the roadway be built? What other developments could occur either later in time? What other environmental impacts could occur if you impact the wetland associated with that direct footprint? So we're looking at what comes next, either in distance or in time. And then cumulative impact studies the effects that have happened previously through the quarries, through the residential developments, other roadways that have been built, and what we think may happen in the future. So we do try to look at what has happened in the past and what would happen in the future and try to have a full understanding of what may occur. One type of indirect impact is induced growth. We typically look at the interchanges or roundabouts, which would provide direct access to the new roadway, and that's where we'd first see development. This area that we have shown in the purple circles is approximately 1 mile from each roundabout. So that would be the first area where we think it would come, but we do understand that the rest of the area could also be affected. And so we're looking for your feedback on that as well. For each resource, so we're going to go, Dodie and Sarah are going to talk more about other resources, but each resource is going to have an assessment of direct impacts, indirect effects, and cumulative effects. We're also going to talk about whether it's a short-term effect, medium, or long-term, whether it's something that would certainly happen, such as the construction and the wetlands that would be impacted right in that way, or what is potential, such as new developments. They could happen, they could not happen. We'll try to estimate what the impacts are, but we're not certain. And then we also want to make sure that we're understanding both the positive and negative impacts to each resource. Once we have the impacts identified, we then want to look at what is the magnitude of change, if it's a high, medium, low, or negligible, and then how important this resource is, or how sensitive is the resource to what impact may be occurring. So we'd rate that from very substantial down to none. It's all a qualitative assessment, but at least it's a way to start comparing the alternatives. For socioeconomics, we would look at our study area would basically be the entire island, because we do understand that anything that happens here would affect the entire island. We have jobs. People are coming from the east end and north side to go to Georgetown. So this does affect the entire island. We're not just looking at this one small area. We'll also evaluate both objective and subjective characteristics. So we have income, education, and then how people feel their sense of placement is on the island. We're also going to evaluate residents, impacts to businesses, impacts to renters, and especially marginalized and vulnerable groups who may not get the same services or same access that maybe those who are not vulnerable have. The socioeconomic evaluation process would start with first collecting data so we can get a baseline of what is out there, look at all the census that Lindsay has nicely already accounted for when she did her traffic study. We'll collect all of the relevant planning documentation, any land use plans, any proposed developments, and then we'll assess what changes could occur because of planned developments or perhaps any changes to laws. We'll then look at the potential benefits and the impacts and compare them from what would happen with this project compared to what a no build would happen. We'd look at quality of life, access, mobility, changes to income and economics and housing. We would then look at ways where we could potentially develop mitigation measures or minimize these impacts. Next, I'll put on a different hat and talk about noise and vibration and greenhouse gas emissions. Noise would be affected by basically your distance to either the new roadway or the existing roadway. On the existing roadway, there may be construction vehicles. So we've been using the UK standards for this, and they like to look at within 165 feet of the existing roadway to assess the effect of the construction vehicles. So we would, again, next step. For operation, we like to focus on 2,000 feet, which is almost a half a mile from the new roadway. We have that larger distance because in a lot of the areas there are very low background sound levels, just nature or whatever industrial facilities may already be going on in the area. To assess the noise, first we would collect baseline data again. For this, we would recommend 2 long-term measurements. We put something that looks like a phone on a tripod and we put it in a safe property for 24 hours. we collect data over the 24-hour period, averaging each hourly data so we understand what the sound levels are throughout the day and whether there are peak times when there are higher sound levels or lower. We would then also do short-term measurements where we would go along existing roadways or in the ambient just to get a background measurement, but mostly along the existing roadways to see what the sound level is caused by the traffic. Slower traffic has lower levels, so we'll try to get a time when we have free flow traffic so we can understand the topography and how the buildings are reacting to the sound levels. So just a short pitch here, if anybody lives along one of the existing roadways in segment 2 or 3 and would like to volunteer their property, please feel free to fill out your comment card with your address and contact information. Maybe we can get together. Once we have this data, we then use a model that we've developed in that FHWA, the Federal Highway Administration in the U.S., has developed to try to model how existing roadways, how the sound levels go beyond distance. It incorporates the existing roadways in a 3D model. We put traffic on the roadways, speed, and then intersect buildings that would be between the roadway and the receptors and terrain lines. So all of that affects how sound levels get to the sensitive noise receptors. This way we can estimate how many people, how many sensitive receptors would be impacted by each alternative. We can then take the future traffic levels that Lindsay will give us and let you know what the sound levels would be existing now compared to if nothing happened, and then compare them to what they would sound like in the future. So if we do move some of the traffic to the new roadway, we would still look at what the sound levels would be on the existing roadway to see if they can not be as high without the new roadway. Vibration, we only look at construction periods, and it's only to assess, to describe what the level of perception of annoyance would be. Typically, there is minimal risk of interruption of what is happening in the building, of being able to use your building, or any damage. But we do want to look at the types of equipment that will be used, how far away they are from receptors, from buildings, what type of activity. So we take all that information so we can qualitatively describe it and once again compare alternatives. And then finally, we have greenhouse gases. That one we also use UK standards for to estimate what the greenhouse gas emissions would be. We look at tailpipe emissions, and then the effect of peat removal and the associated loss of carbon sequestration, and what the effect of the roadway material, where it's sourced from, and how it's disposed of later. And we incorporate all that information to come up with an estimate and compare the alternatives. We would then develop mitigation measures, such as restricting vehicle idling, reducing amounts of vegetation removal, or revising a road design to potentially reduce the removal of peat overburden. And with that, I'll turn that over to Dodie.
Thank you. All right, I'm going to talk about hydrology, drainage, and geoenvironmental. Hydrology and drainage is influenced by various factors. You can see them listed there: topography, geology, climate, tropical storms, hurricanes, freshwater lenses, and a large mangroves population. The flat and low-lying topography is vulnerable to winds and flooding that's caused by hurricanes and tropical storms. Flooding varies on the island. It can be limited with areas that have sufficient elevation, which means they're steeper, and porous limestone outcroppings. And there's frequent flooding in both developed and undeveloped areas that have low elevation or soil, peat, or caprock, because low permeability, so the rainwater doesn't infiltrate as easily. And the central mangrove wetland is very important in the hydrologic cycle. In the local freshwater hydrology, groundwater replenishment, water filtration, hurricane protection, and soil stabilization. And within our project area, the flow generally the water flow typically goes from the south to the north. All right, so for geoenvironmental, there's the three largest freshwater lenses are the lower valley lens, the north side lens, and the east end lens. You can see that there. The lower valley lens, it underlines or is adjacent to section 1 and section 2 of the proposed roadway, and that's the smallest of the three. The north side lens is about 0.6 miles north of the east end of section 2, and the east end lens is about 2.5 miles east of the eastern end of section 3, and that's the largest of the three. There's a little diagram there. There are three zones to the freshwater lens. We have freshwater, brackish, and the saline. And the freshwater lenses are typically recharged mainly during large rainstorms. And these freshwater lenses are a very important source of potable water. Okay, so next we're going to talk about peat. Peat underlies most of the mangrove swamps, and it covers bedrock. It's mainly composed of the organic remains from the mangroves when they're breaking down and decaying. Peat is an important player in climate change because it sequesters greenhouse gases. Trial pit data was collected along the proposed alignment. Section 2 was from 2008, Section 3 was in 2014. It was found that peat does underlie a section of the proposed roadway. Most areas is not very sufficient, but near the area of Lookout Gardens, it does average 5 feet in depth and can go up to 14 feet. Okay. So now I'm going to go over some potential impacts and some mitigation measures. So during construction, there may be soil compaction and erosion, temporary dewatering, and disturbance of sensitive natural resources. Some mitigation measures include erosion and sediment pollution control, which can include the use of low-pack construction equipment, proper siting of the temporary stockpiles and access roads, and using best practice pollution prevention techniques. You can see there's a silt fence there, and there's the mat and the filter log there. Also, there may be a damming effect caused by the roadway. As we talked before, the flow goes from the south to the north. So north of the proposed roadway, the wetlands the hydrology might be restricted, and then south of the roadway, as the damming effect, it may cause it to be inundated, the wetlands south of it, and also the adjacent developed areas, which may alter obviously the hydrology and the drainage flow in that area. And if existing drainage infrastructure is damaged, that may of course cause subsequent flooding of those neighboring areas. In order to minimize this impact, the water flow can be maintained by using, you can see the pictures there, an elevated roadway, aggregate roadway embankment, or box culverts to try to maintain the flow through the roadway. Okay. The construction of the roadway may cause the loss of mangroves and of peat and their important environmental benefits. Some mitigation measures would be to minimize their impact through the proposed roadway alignment design, salvage and reuse the peat, and then fill by elevating the roadway. And we can definitely look at other mitigation options for that. All right, the stormwater and drainage patterns may be impacted by the roadway, which in turn can impact the groundwater and the surface water flows, and then also in turn impact the ecology of natural resources. In addition, contamination from the roadway, either directly from like spills or indirectly from stormwater runoff, could potentially pollute groundwater or freshwater lenses or sensitive habitats, such as, the mangroves. A stormwater management plan, including drainage infrastructure design, which will handle the stormwater that comes off the roadway, will be developed in order to minimize these impacts. Okay, various documents will be reviewed to determine applicable standards. We'll be looking at the Cayman Islands, the UK, and international standards to develop what we should be looking at. And also we will be consulting with national departments. All right, so we will be performing assessments in order to identify cumulative impacts so that we can select potential mitigation options. There's a list of different assessments we're going to complete: the hydrologic and hydraulic analysis, which is basically looking at water, how it flows, different storm discharges, freshwater lens study, flood risk assessment, mangrove peat assessment, cut and fill estimation, assessment of risk significance, so we can see how significant the risk might be to a certain resource, and the impact of sea level rise and climate change. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah.
Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the terrestrial ecology and the cultural and natural heritage sites that we're going to be evaluating during the EIA study. There's several of these sites that have been identified within the study area that will take a look not only for their functional loss due to the direct impacts of the roadway, but indirectly through the operation phase. So some of the resources that have been identified include 2 National Trust sites, which are the Central Mangrove Wetland and the Mastic Reserve. Also, you can see in the map shown in red, we have national conservation lands such as the Little Sound Environmental Zone, Meager Bay Pond and Animal Sanctuary, Little Kea Duck Pond, and portions of the Central Mangrove Wetland. These sites, as well as ecologically sensitive areas to the north and south of the study area that are not designated as protected areas, will be evaluated for the potential functional loss with the goal of achieving a no net loss of biodiversity. So the Central Mangrove Wetland is an integral role to the natural ecosystem of the Cayman Islands. It has a total of 8,655 acres. Mangroves make up approximately 36% of Grand Cayman's total land area. And the Central Mangrove Wetland is the largest contiguous mangrove wetland in the Caribbean. It's home to numerous plant and animal species. Mangroves play a huge role in protecting the coastlines by reducing effects of storm surges, filtering nutrients to the North Sound, which is a big part of the food web and the ecosystem here, and they store carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Mangroves are also an important habitat for different species. The West Indian whistling duck, about 83% of the population, is found in the Cayman Islands. The Grand Cayman parrot and the Cayman Brock parrot are 2 endemic species found on the island, and the Grand Cayman parrot relies on black mangroves for nesting. And then we also have Meager Bay Pond, which was designated as an animal sanctuary in 1976 to protect resident and migratory birds. Also, another important area is the Mastic Reserve and the trail. This is the largest area of dry forest on Grand Cayman. It's an old growth forest. It's a higher part of the island, and historically it's been above water nearly 1.9 million years, longer than the rest of the island. So it's where a lot of the native flora and fauna evolved. It's home to many endemic species. The Mastic Trail was established in 1995 to allow users to experience natural, undisturbed areas of Grand Cayman. And the Mastic Reserve is designated as an important bird area to provide habitat to threatened and near threatened bird species. So the methodology that's going to be used to evaluate the terrestrial ecology is going to be multi-step, starting with the established baseline conditions. This is the data gathering phase where we look at technical reports, publications, government documents, and GIS data sets that are already available. Also, the hydrological modeling that's going to be taking place. The second step is to identify potential receptors, such as those that we've been talking about. And then the third step is to do desktop and field review assessments. So going out into the field with GPS units, using drone technologies to classify what's there and characterize and map the ecological features in terms of type, size, and functional value. And there's several different ways you can classify the functional value of any ecosystem. And then the next step is to perform a significance and magnitude of change evaluation, which is an impact assessment of the ecological features to establish a degree of effect for each resource. And then from there, we can establish mitigation measures to compensate for any impacts to these resources. All right, so like I said before, we're going to take a look at the direct effects as well as temporary impacts for the construction phase, and then also the secondary, indirect, and cumulative impacts for the operation of the extension. Some anticipated impacts include loss of habitat, habitat fragmentation, loss of species through disturbance or wildlife vehicle collisions, restriction of animal migratory movements, construction and roadway runoff, traffic noise, and reduced hydrologic connectivity. So we are going to look at mitigation measures and evaluate them using a tool with achieving no net loss of biodiversity. And there's many creative ways we can do this, and some of the examples are shown here on the screen, and those include wildlife crossings, hydrological crossings, replacement of the habitat that will be impacted through the creation of habitat, restoration of habitat that is existing, enhancement, and preservation. So for the cultural and natural heritage sites, a lot of the sites in this area of the study are the same as the ecological features, but they're also protected under the National Conservation Act, the National Trust Act, and the Public Lands Act. And some of these resources that have been identified are the Central Mangrove Wetland, the Mastic Reserve, and the Mastic Trail. And these resources are important because they have archaeological, historical, or architectural interest to the public. So the assessment is kind of similar to the ecological assessment that will be done. First phase is the assessment to gather information for potential direct, indirect, and cumulative effects. Second step is consultation with the stakeholders, reaching out to the DOE, the National Museum, National Archive, the National Trust, nonprofits, and community members to identify any additional resources or any potential future heritage resources. And then from there, we'll develop a scale to establish each resource's intolerance to change based on their importance and status to come up with a degree of effect and develop a weighted effect for each resource. And then from there, we can make recommendations for avoidance and minimizations to impacts for resources. And then if it's not able to be avoided and minimized, mitigation options, which you can see on the screen. And that's it.
So the presentation, we've spoken about the draft terms of reference, but for some of you, you're probably wondering where can you locate it? Where can you find the document? So you can find the document at National Conservation Council, which is www.conservation.ky. If you navigate to the EIA headings, then pick EIA reports, you'll be able to download the draft terms of reference. And also the National Roads Authority, which is www.cameronroads.com. Under the project headings, you'll find draft terms of reference, document for the EIA. You can download the document there. So because it hasn't been made available here, some of you may already have it. You may be interested in reading it. Good bedtime reading, by the way. So as a result of this evening, you're welcome to leave your comments this evening if you have comments for this evening to provide. There'll be some boxes. EIA and NIA staff can collect that, and they'll be passed on to the Environmental Assessment Board. You can email your comments to the Environmental Assessment Board, which is at doe.gov.ky. You can also mail your comments at Department of Environment, PO Box 10202 KY1, 1002 Grand Cayman, Cayman Islands. Or you can also hand deliver your comments to the Environmental Center, 580 North Sound Road, Georgetown, Grand Cayman. They will compile them and send them to us and the consultants, and we'll provide a response. The deadline for the comments is, for the draft terms of reference is Monday, February the 20th. And then, thank you very much. Jay?
Danny, thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give the consultants a round of applause for their presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you again, everyone. Appreciate it. Now, again, we are going to invite questions about the terms of reference for the environmental impact assessment. That's pretty much the reason we're here tonight, is to discuss those aspects of this project. So at this point in time, we have some roving microphones. We are streaming live tonight, so please wait for the microphone to come to you, and then we can ask the questions. Raise your hand, and you could be first. We get the gentleman over here. There we go.
I just had two questions. The first one was in regards to whether or not there's a weighting that's applied to the different areas that you mentioned. You know, there's greenhouse emissions, there's loss of flora and fauna. You know, how do you decide which one is a priority over the other when you're looking at all of these areas? That is one question. The other question is in regards to the impact that the current situation has on everyone's living situation. And this is maybe a question for the NRA, I'm not sure, but how do you quantify, or how do you determine the loss of productivity in terms of, you know, spending 4 or 5 hours in traffic, and how does that play into the decision with regards to the actual road extension?
It's a good question. We're trying to find out who's going to answer.
I can start. As far as the weighting of the environmental impacts to resources, there's not a fixed mathematical, solution to this, but we will put all of the information on the table, and we're going to have to qualitatively just look at the data. As far as loss of productivity, quality of life, I'm sure Denny will have more to say about this, but we are looking at that as far as the socioeconomics. Once again, it's qualitative, but we are interested in your feedback of what you think is involved in quality of life, and loss of productivity.
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand what that process is. Will there be a questionnaire? We know there's been 2 meetings so far, but
This
how
is
do
the
you?
second.
Right.
Yeah.
This is the second. Correct. Yes. But how do you intend to get the feedback from the individuals here today? Because, I mean, we get what you're saying in terms of, the environment. I mean, we grew up here, all of us, we love the environment, but at some point, how do you decide how important that is in regards to, not getting home until 8 o'clock at night? How do you find that balance,
Completely
and I know
understood.
it may not be a part of what you're engaged to do, but I think that's what we want to hear more about.
Absolutely. So I apologize if you get motion sickness. So one moment, please. Cover a lot of material tonight. Is everybody's head spinning?
You guys did a record time, by the way. I think that was a really good presentation in a short period of time.
Thank you.
So here is just an example of the summary of anticipated impacts that we will look at per alternative. So we will qualitatively and quantitatively look at all of those different
I
impacts.
saw
for
that, but what I'm trying to understand is socioeconomic impact. How material is that in regards to if you compare it to, the terrestrial ecology impacts? Because at some point, some of those categories are more material than others. So how do you decide, at the end of it, which one helps?
You're
make the
talking about the
decision?
scale. How would we decide if it's a low, medium, or best
Yeah, so
benefit
each
versus
of those
low?
categories, do they rank the same or do you have different priorities?
So different priorities. So we will take a look at it from a holistic perspective for the different categories, but then that's where the second public consultation would come in with how we summarize the anticipated. So we would objectively give you both the qualitative and the quantitative results from our analysis to show you how we would summarize that and look at a benefit cost analysis. So we would, for example, you had mentioned about the quality of life, people sitting in their car for 4 hours a day and how to measure that. Is that part of it? So for example, for land use accessibility on how to measure that, we can actually look at how long, for example, we can break it up by district. So say you're at a certain point, how long it would take you, within 25 minutes to be able to access local healthcare, grocery store, et cetera. And we can look at travel time index, and we can look at different sustainability and quantitative performance metrics to see about the quality of life and how it can be improved. And then we would come to the public to see if we are spot on with these alternatives, if you think we're missing something, we haven't captured something, and then we look to you again for your opinion and your feedback as to what is critical and important to you.
I'd also like to add on to that. I had to confer with Denny behind Lindsay's back. We will be doing surveys. We will be coming to the public. We do want you to be part of this process, and we want your input. So we will be putting out a survey, during our data collection to make sure we understand, if there is a weighting system that you prefer, how the public really feels about what's most important to you.
And we have one there, it's one here, and one in the front as well.
Two quick questions. About 10 years ago, I was told by planning, I think it was, that it was intended to have a railway line down the middle of this road corridor. Is that still in plan? And the other question I have is about the same time, maybe 20 years ago now, there was a strong move to have this whole area being a Ramsar site. Has that died, or is it still alive?
Question for Gina. The Ramsar. Yeah. Sorry, the Ramsar question would go to Gina.
Sorry. So we're going to give this to the Department of Environmental, Ms. Jeannie Banks Petrie, the Ramsar specific.
Yes, so there's not currently any active proposal to designate the entire central mangrove wetland as a Ramsar site. So that's not an active consideration.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
And I also would like to acknowledge the presence of the Premier, the Honorable Wayne Payton, and Deputy Speaker, the Honorable Dwayne Ebanks. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, Mr. Gibbs, you had also a question about, was it light rail you were referring to? You said something about a railway down the middle. Okay, yeah, I'm not sure where that came from, but what Lindsay was alluding to in her presentation earlier is that the corridor, as we are proposing it, has a number of different options, for possibilities. So in a lot of like U.S. cities and so forth, what they call reimagining the corridor. So a corridor can start out being something that, exclusively for cars, heavy traffic and stuff. But as you grow, as depending on how you determine your growth is going to go and what emphasis you want to put on, say, public transport and so forth, then you can have things like light rail or what's called bus rapid transit, things like that. So you could imagine the inner lanes or the outer lanes being dedicated for just buses and so forth. Yeah. So it's not out of the realm of possibilities. All those things would have to be, considered and costed. Yeah.
Was there another aspect to your question that we missed, or did we catch it all? Thank you. Perfect. Yes, ladies.
Hi. Are you looking at the impact on the mangroves as a habitat for juvenile species that use them as a nursery, such as stingrays at Stingray City, fish and shark populations for ecotourism and diving, and the impact on Caymanian fishermen's fish stocks in the environmental impact assessment?
Yeah, so mangroves, like you said, are a very, very important habitat for juvenile species as well, and providing protection as they kind of mature and are able to move out into the outer reefs. So, like I said, we're going to look at the corridor as a direct effect, and then everything else is looked at cumulatively and for those indirect impacts. So that is something that we consider. The coral reefs, that is part of the indirect and cumulative analysis that will be taken into account.
All right, thank you.
Great question. This lady.
Thank you. So this study here talks about hydrology and drainage, and for years in Bordentown, we've had flooding right in the middle of Bordentown. We haven't done anything about that. So we're going to do a study now to determine whether we're going to create more flooding going through there, but the residents who are already there are already suffering. And then we've had so much development on the outer skirts of all of the, look at in front of Hurley's. I heard the lady that spoke first, Lindsay, and I did like what you had to say. But if we look at the bottlenecking that happens at Linford Pearson straight down to Bobby Thompson Way, we don't have anywhere for you to expand us because we've allowed two monstrosity buildings of housing for the rich because I can't afford to buy it. And not rich, so I have to say it's rich. And they don't allow for any expansion, and they've removed all of any protection on those areas along the iron shore or the shoreline. And when I remember going across there, the water level and the land level were almost on par. So that hasn't, the only thing I think that's going to do is to stop some of the tidal waves that come in with the hurricane. And I don't mean huge tidal waves, but waves nonetheless. But we watched Ivan push buildings straight into our roadways because I drove through buildings and people's apartments and their kitchens to get to town. And we cut away roadways using chainsaws to let people out of their development. So how does that, allowing that kind of building and now doing this impact study be any different if we've allowed all of that building, but now we're going to do impact studies to determine whether flooding is going to occur there, but we haven't determined it. I feel a little lost, like we, and I don't mean to sound negative, but it's almost like we're picking and choosing where we're going to do the studies, and we still need the roadway. And the gentleman who spoke first, I think what he was trying to say, from what I understood, was how do you quantify what you get out of that study to what impacts us as humans? And where do you put our need over the need of the wetland, or over the need of the mangrove, or over the need of the getting to our workplace? So are we going to keep all of the workplace in Georgetown, or are we going to move some of that out district and then sort of shift the way the traffic operates? So a lot there wasn't a specific question, but it's all relative.
So let me frame it in its context. And you're basically talking about development planning issues. And you're quite right. We've made mistakes in the past, and there's been some people may say, well, we've had all these plans and they've been put on the shelf, or so we've come through this in such a manner that we're at this point. And so we're at this sort of critical point of reckoning in our country where we've had to really now come together and say, how are we going to solve some of these issues? And some of them are due to, lack of planning, poor land use planning, poor foresight on how we develop. So let's just take, for example, the Grand Harbor area. So I've been with the come up through the public works ranks and NRA so I've been in this for about 30 years now. And I can tell you that when we started, we actually had 2 parallel roadways planned at that time. And so we're at this point where, decisions were made, to eliminate one of those. So here we have one corridor in the essentially the narrowest point on the island. That point of the island is 3/4 of a mile wide. So we're using a set of, traffic skills, traffic modeling skills and so forth to try now to see how can we get maximum capacity out of what we have now. Because like you said, the monstrosity of the buildings and the Grand Harbor and all that sort of stuff, how do we get capacity through there? We obviously can't put a parallel road now through Grand Harbor, right? So we've got to figure this out. Yeah. Those are all a part of the, yes. Yeah. And those things, so let me put it in this context. Those things have cost. And let's imagine that we wanted to build an overpass over the Grand Harbor roundabout. You have to think about how would you construct that and manage the traffic and manage the traffic daily. So those are types of things those are types of real considerations that you have, How do you maintain that? Was it 20, 30,000 vehicles per day? We're here saying that it's heavily congested, but how do you support that while you build an overpass at the same time? So these are real considerations, but your point is absolutely spot on. Yeah. Thank you.
We've got one question there back in the back. We've got another question back in the back over there as well.
Yep. I see a lot of older folks in the room who, like me, have seen our population grow dramatically in the past 40 years. And my question really, I think, goes to a point Lindsay made about a projection for 10, 20, 30 years forward. And I'm wondering how, first, speeding up flow from east coming to town is going to help. But I don't think that's the point. If we fix today's traffic jams for today's population, what are we looking forward to in the next 10, 20, 30, 40 years unless we plan a ceiling for population?
That's one of the considerations. Yeah.
Right? If we don't have a ceiling plan, at least something we're aiming for at immigration or via immigration, that then we're just going to be running into this mess every time we fix the current problem. 5 years from now, we're back in the same situation.
Yeah.
Ed?
Just let me add to it, because what you're saying is correct. But there are other ways to do it. So one of the things is, so what you're talking about is basically, looking and said, what do we want the population to be? We want that to be 100,000, 150,000, 200,000. That's one strategy. Some of the other things we can do is, like I said, go back to land use. How do we plan? So one of the things, I think Lindsay showed a graphic where you saw like a bunch of blue dots and a bunch of red dots. So if you could pull that back up real quick, I'll explain what that is essentially.
That was the work and living.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll explain that in very layman terms for you, and you'll get an idea of what I talk about when we talk about reimagining how we plan. So if you look at this graphic of the island, and the blue dots, well, they look like purple dots to me, but those are what we call trip productions. So those are where people live essentially, right? And then, so look at where people live, blue dots, and then look at where people work, red dots. So anyone see the problem? Yeah. Okay, so how can we fix that? So let's start by taking employment, some of the employment, and creating a balance. So move some of the employment out east. If we saw these long traffic jams from the photos that Lindsay showed, so while all these, miles and miles of traffic jams, thousands of people trying to get into one employment area, the red dots. What if we had employment distributed further out east as well? So then you have a balance. So you have some people going to town to work, some people going eastward to work. Government could be a big, could lead that charge. So, even say NRA, where we work with 120 people, Public Works, another 120 people, DOE, this types of things. So if we can start to move some of these employment centers out east, then we create a fair balance. Because what we're all sitting here talking about really is what's happening during the congestion periods where we're trying to, 7 to 8. So we got these 2 peak hour periods. So we're investing all of this money into trying to solve the peak hour period problem, which could be solved through proper land use planning as well. Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you. I got a couple of questions and a suggestion. Malcolm kind of hit on some points that I thought that I was going to talk on earlier. I think if we're going to have a complete transparent process here, the matrix that you all are going to fill out with all the various different elements that each one of you are tasked to complete. To Malcolm's point, each matrix scale usually has a weight on each segment or each column. And I think to Malcolm's point, if the public can understand what that weight is going to be on each one of those, then we can understand what the outcomes may possibly be that will help us, whether or not it's social, economic, or help us with the environment. But we need to understand that weighted system. Failure to really give that to the people, this is not going to be a transparent process. So I pray that's going to be a crucial and integral part of this educational process, because I don't think you can do it anyhow else.
I'd like to repeat what we said before. I think it would be perfect to encourage you all. Let's all talk about this. We'll do a survey. We'll try to get your feedback on what you believe the weighting should be. This is really your process. We're trying to help collect the information, share the information with you, and then we can make a decision of how we should weight it. And
I'm going to tell you how the Cayman Islands work, ma'am.
Would he?
No. Oh, hey,
Okay. We just have a lot of people that want to ask questions, and I love you, my friend. You're a good buddy.
Jay, please.
Okay. Go
This
ahead.
is an open forum.
Yes, sir.
I'm not here to campaign. I'm not
Thank
here
you.
to do nothing. I'm here because I am a concerned citizen. All right?
Yes, sir. I agree.
Having said that, all of those things being said, Cayman Islands doesn't work that way, ma'am. You need to set what the government wants as a priority first. Then that's going to poke people to want to do or say something else or see where it's going to go. You're not going to solicit very easy how people feel on a social economic issue or any of those things until you let them know what the parameters are. And then they're going to go, well, all right, I'm cool with it. Or no, you know what? Hell no. I'm going to fight tooth and nail for this. So what I'm saying to you, don't rely on that. Put the weighting system out based on cabinet paper, because cabinet had to create a paper to create all of this. So whatever the cabinet document says, that's weighted in those cabinet documents. So at that particular moment, put the scale, what was in the cabinet paper, so everybody can see what it is at this particular moment. That's all I'm saying. Secondly,
Thank you.
in terms of when we're coming down from the east, as you all well know, almost 50%, if not probably more by now, of the residents in the Cayman Islands, electorate in particular, is east of the Tomlinson Roundabout. I suggested, I think the director was on my show several years ago, which I directed, and I said to him, I said, look, when you're doing, I call it a Dirty Reed Roundabout because that's my homage to Dirty, okay? So I call it the Dirty Reed Roundabout. I don't know if anybody knows about anything else, but it's a Dirty Reed Roundabout to me. So I said to them, I said, what you need to do is to mitigate people going back into the old Prospect Road in the mornings so we can have a free-flowing traffic. I see Ms. Pandui there. She'll remember. Thank you. I want to say, and I said to her on the air as well, Mark, I know you're smiling, but thank you all very much for making it happen. Because as a resident coming down, that certainly paid great dividends. I suggest you do the same thing for the Grand Harbor Roundabout. Stop persons from coming in from Grand Harbor and everywhere else turning into South Sound between the hours of 7 And 9, let them go down straight down the road and just see how that works for the time being, because I believe these issues are so simplistic, just like that one was, that we can mitigate these issues. Second or thirdly, I wish that you had left this till 7 o'clock at night so that you all could have probably seen the traffic coming up an hour and a half just to get to my house in Hearst Road.
Yeah.
I live about 450 yards from the intersection, and sometimes it takes me 5 minutes just to get from my house to that intersection in the evenings. Third, well, another one, I just simply don't understand, Director. I said this to Ms. Pandui some time ago. The bus stop right at the top of the road. If you talk about traffic mitigation issues, why in the world would you put that bus stop right on the apex of a turnout and in one lane? Don't make no sense. You all don't drive it in the days or nights that people can get killed in that area. There's enough area that the landowner has, you can push back. Third, I hope and I pray that in the weighted scale, we're going to look at the water table. We're less than approximately 5.5 feet on average above water level throughout the whole entire Cayman Islands. This area is even lower. Our water table, as you all mentioned, is essential to all of us, especially the lower valley. But a lot of people don't realize that our water in the eastern districts come from Water Authority. Where does that water come from? Our water lens. So I hope on the weighted scale, that water lens issue is weighted heavily, because if not, it's not going to make a difference. And to Deidre's point, I hope you all are taking in factors like, for example, rezoning. Because when you're going to build that road, you're going to rezone to high density residential, probably general neighborhood commercial, and hopefully you'll go down and scale it all around. That means more people, more influx that's going to be coming in. The height of the level of the land. When they just did Gun Square and the new bypass road, all those houses were flooding. We're not looking at those mediation issues, and I pray that we kind of look at everything in a holistic approach. And whatever you do, every one of you, please read the NRA agreement. Don't let us enter into another good for nothing agreement like that ever again for our roadway system. Thank you.
Thank you, Woody. Thank you, sir. Next, we get somebody right here.
Good evening. My question, I confess, is not as technical, so hopefully an easy one for someone on the panel. I noticed that instead of 2 spurs to the Frank Sound area, well, there's 2 spurs leading to the Frank Sound area. Why wasn't a northern spur bypassing Frank Sound considered? Is this because of the environmental impact or it having a negative environmental impact?
Okay, so the question is, why is there 2 spurs as you approach Frank Sound Road?
Mhm.
Right, okay, so we're not showing all of the roadway from Frank Sound into the east end areas, the eastern part of the island, but there is a consideration for having the lower portion go along, because there is a ridge, if people are familiar, there is a ridge along Seaview Road as you head into East End proper. So there is a potential for that road to then continue from there, go along that ridge, and then connect into John McLean Drive. That's probably, who knows how far out, from in consideration, because as you know, there's no demand for it at this point in time. But again, like we said, forward planning, forward thinking. If we don't think about it or plan it, people will come along, develop, and then we have to go and move homes and what have you. And then the other one is actually goes up into the interior. I think it's south of, I think we do have maps that show that. So after we can kind of explain it a little bit more, but it goes south of the Salinas. Yeah, or the Iguana Reserve. Gina can correct me if I'm wrong, but yeah. So there are 2 considerations of future routes which we're not showing at this point in time. Yeah. So it's not part of the EIA because those are, let's just say, much further out. It could be decades to come. We don't know at this point. But yeah, but they're a part of what we are our long-term road planning corridors, which is under Section 26 of the National Roads Authorities. Of the Roads Act. Yeah, of the Roads Act. Yeah. So.
Mr. Arden.
I have a very simple question, and I see other people are answering questions, and the Premier is here. Maybe he will offer to answer this one. You go on quick as that? Really? He just killed my question.
Do you want to wait?
No. He'll hear it. I may be easily confused, but I am confused since this process started. Denny said that they were instructed by government, cabinet, that is, to request a EIA through the NCC. Yeah. Now, the question that lingers is this an exercise in futility? Is the road being built or not? That is the question. Is the road being built in accordance with the gazettal that Gilbert McLean did on the 5th day of May, 2005? Because if the road is being built, there's no need for this. Cabinet would say to NRA, please get those consultants to tell us how to build it to mitigate the environmental impact. But here we are gathering information, and what is happening is we see Sustainable Cayman National Trust, and now a whole heap more, who believe that they are capable of stopping the building of this road. And we, as a people, need to know, will the road be built? Is the intent to build this road, or is it the intent to get these people to come here and waste their time, we waste their money, and the road not gonna be built? Now, the Premier needs to answer that, or his cabinet needs to answer that, because he, a head of cabinet, has a constitutional responsibility to do this and answer it, and he cannot delegate or abrogate that authority to Sustainable Cayman, DOE, NCC, National Trust, or anyone else. I do not see, I can't remember the last time Black mangroves voted for any politician. So that's the question. Can somebody answer it?
We have the people on the panel who might try that, sir. Thank you.
We were instructed to approach the Environmental Assessment Board to determine the screening opinion. That's all I can say.
Can you repeat that, sir? I don't think he heard you.
Yeah, so what Denny is basically saying is that we followed the process as was under the NCC, the EIA directive. That's basically, so we take the road plans to them, there's a screening, and then, so forth. So that's why we're here,
Come on.
I know you're gonna.
Mr. Rogers,
I-
the people that-
I-
the
I
people
see
that
your
need to answer that
struggle.
question aren't here.
Yes.
I see your struggle.
Yes, because remember,
But-
we're the technocrats and we.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, son.
So
I appreciate that.
there's a political.
The question is for this country, and more importantly, for the people of Bodden Town, East End, North Side, and this country in general, those in particular in this country in general, is the intent of the government to build the road. If it is not, we are going through an exercise in futility. Now, we need to know.
Let's get a try and answer here, please.
Well, first of all, I'm not going to answer the question on behalf of the government, but there is a process question here, and that's why I'm here, is to talk about the EIA process. So EIAs don't make decisions. This document is not going to say build the road or not build the road. The document is going to outline all of the potential impacts that could be associated with the road. It's going to advise how those impacts can be either avoided in the first place or mitigated if they can't be avoided. And then the decision makers will have the information that they need, full information, in order to make the decision on the road. We've heard people's concerns about potential damming of communities to the south of the road, and that is a real concern. We don't even have to go very far. We've had examples of what happens with mangrove wetlands basins when you dam them. So South Sound Basin is a good example. What happened in Ivan, a lot of the mangroves died, for example, as what happened in 88 in Gilbert in Little Cayman. So the idea behind the EIA is to ensure that we fully consider all the options and all the associated impacts, and that the decision makers, who will likely be cabinet in this instance, have all of the relevant information in front of them to make an informed decision. That's why we're here, so that we can understand from people whether the terms of reference as they've been crafted take all of your concerns into account, so that the issues can be laid out in the environmental statement.
So the decision makers will determine whether or not to build a road.
Yes.
That's not how it works. That road was gazetted in 2005 by one cabinet. 4 subsequent cabinets did not reverse it. And that was gazetted subject to need, resources, time, and name it. All of a sudden now, if this government is looking at it, they need to tell the people of this country whether or not this exercise is to determine if the road is going to be built, what are the conditions it's going to be built under. And you and the consultants would be looking to see what are the mitigating factors. And that may very be too cost prohibitive, but the cabinet needs to say what their decision was. We are going to build a road to alleviate the traffic, and we are looking to see what is the easiest way to do it and the most cost-effective way to avoid so much environmental impact. Well, it's still dictatorship in this, start and get dictatorship in this country. What?
Mr.
This is democracy, and cabinet, the premier needs to be here. Well, that's all right. I'll find him. The radio is out there.
Thank you, Mr. McLean. Thank you for your comments. Go ahead, please.
Just a question on the process. As I understand it, the NRA has, on the instructions of the government, the cabinet, been asked to conduct an EIA, but that EIA would be subject to NCC evaluation at some point, National Conservation Council evaluation. And then that would then lead to what? A referral back to the NRA for the NRA to consider whether it makes a recommendation to cabinet, because after all, in this capacity, for the purposes of laying out and building public roads, it is cabinet and cabinet's decision only to approve public roads. They are the decision makers, and I understand what Ms. Ebanks-Petrie said a while ago, that they wish to be better informed. But at the end of the day, what they need to be really careful about is whether they are abdicating their function, as Mr. McLean alluded to earlier, by being influenced to act based on an environmental impact assessment or views of stakeholders, when in fact they need to make that decision, whether it's informed or not, right? They are statutorily charged, constitutionally charged with the duty of making that decision, not the NRA. So it seems to me that what has been laid out here is a very lengthy, convoluted process, which by the most ambitious of estimations will take years before the end of it. And certainly this administration will come to an end before we even have the opportunity of before we see a Section 3 gazettal for the easternmost part of the road, because I understand there's a gazettal for the first leg of the road of the east-west arterial. No, there's a Section 26, as I understand, for the entirety of it. There hasn't been a Section 3 gazettal as yet for any of it. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So what we're looking at is at least a year or two before Cabinet can make a decision, an informed decision about whether it will issue a Section 3 gazette. And when that happens, that triggers an even lengthier process of acquisition. So what we're hearing tonight is that by the most ambitious of estimations, we won't see the possibility of a road being built anytime in the foreseeable future, and definitely not within this administration.
Yeah.
And I'm just basing that on common knowledge that everybody should be aware of. Any road is an ambitious project. This one has been planned for a very long time, hasn't been built yet. But now we're adding another element to it, which seems very complex. We're talking about socioeconomic impact assessments. Those things are very complex. I can only dream of what the remit of that or scope of that assessment might be. We hope, as many folks have alluded to here tonight, that it includes some weighted consideration to the plight of those poor folks who spend most of their daily lives commuting to and from Georgetown from the eastern districts. Because as Mr. McLean said, quite aptly, mangrove trees don't vote. But I'm sure there's a lot of angry voters out there who wish to get to and fro work in an efficient manner and not spend half their lives in their cars, dressing their kids for school, feeding them breakfast, or do whatever it is. We've heard so many complaints about that, and yet we're here today listening to what we believe is the advent of a very protracted, very complicated process, which will frustrate any forward progress. That's just my opinion.
I think the director was about ready to answer.
Yeah, not answer specifically, but to say yes, this ultimate decision will be with cabinet to whether to build a road. And you're right. And I think you surmised in your sort of timeline process. I think that's what you're saying is pretty much correct. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. That's the process we're following.
I think we had another question in the back there. Oh, we have one here. Melanie with two there. Let's go here first. Yeah. And we'll come to you. Yeah.
Could somebody help me to understand why the box area is the area being considered only when we still have traffic coming from two other districts?
This is more the environmental effects that we're looking at for that boxed area. Lindsay's been looking at the entire corridor, and so we're going to take her traffic information. We're focused on that red box area as far as the direct impacts to wetlands, socioeconomics. Like I said, socioeconomics is island-wide. So it's trying to understand, what the direct impact of the footprint of construction of the project, and then what indirect and the next set of effects could occur. We can, if you have a comment on that, if you'd like that study area change widened, we can certainly consider that.
Well, what my comment is going to be is I'd like to know how the mangroves can help people that get stuck in traffic if there's a fatal accident, say before Frankstown Junction, and people have to sleep in their cars and can't get home?
That's why we're considering all of the impacts. Socioeconomics is typically a hard one to analyze as far as effects, but this is a unique community in that you are having such a impact to your how your lives are. So
And-
we are considering that. Like we discussed with the gentleman, we will survey. We will consider what you are concerned about. And like Gina said, we'll take all this information and then give this information to the cabinet and they can make the informed decision based on that.
And I'd just like to add that the morning or the afternoon of Ivan, I couldn't make it no further than Guardhouse Hill. My parents was in East End. I walked all the way through Bordentown in 5, 6, 8 feet of sand because vehicles couldn't pass, and made it as far as Glass House, which a lot of people wouldn't know where Glass House is. But that's Pease Bay, Bordentown, with the opposite the Mega Bay Pond. I walked that far trying to get to my parents. Pure sand. It took me 3 days to get to East End. So what does that mean for those people up there that have emergency and need to get to town to where the facilities are? That plays a big, big part in this country.
It sounds like, sir, that you are answering a weighted scale question for us, which we greatly appreciate. Both of you have started already discussing the weighting of the scale, which we greatly appreciate, and we would love to have more people give us that feedback because that helps us. I know the gentleman in the back had said that we need to give you the scale to react to, but it sounds like he also started the ball rolling with providing us feedback first. So it can be a give and take where we can obviously take the feedback if you're willing to give it to us, and we could give it back to you for a reaction then. But thank you very much. It sounds like both of you are already starting the ball rolling with what is most important to you, and that's why we're here tonight. So thank you very much.
Please. We're coming to you. I see you. Letting other people speak before we come back to you, sir.
Good evening. Thank you to the panel. People have different opinions. Just to be clear, this is my personal opinion, nothing to do with any organization I'm associated with. This is the largest mangrove wetland in our region. We are meant to be trying to preserve it. The mangroves are vitally important to our ecosystem and what a lot of people call the ecological heart of Grand Cayman. So in addition to looking at trying to drop the road, the second section of it where it crosses the wettest part, if we could look at trying to drop that road, which I think you're going to be looking at all sorts of variations to avoid the most sensitive areas. Much of the environmental concerns could be prevented by rezoning both sides of the road as being environmentally sensitive land. And it would create a wildlife corridor. So my question is, could that be a mitigation point and a compromise to actually make the achievement of what we're trying to do here for everyone?
Yeah, I think during the coordination of the mitigation efforts, we'll engage with kind of the different entities that are involved with land ownership and land use, but preservation of land that's already there to kind of act as conservation easements, that is an option that can be considered.
Is that something of recommendations you can make as in your EIA, by the way?
Mhm.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Back to you, sir. Thank you.
Trying to remember what the question was, but just again, two questions. what other information do we know will government rely on to make this decision? Because, I mean, I respect everyone that's here tonight, but 98% of what will come from this is how it impacts the environment. So what else will government have to make a decision on or by other than the environmental impact assessment? Because it seems like what the focus of this is the environment, one, which is fine. And then what other discussions have been made with stakeholders in that area? We know there's some very large landholders in that region that might be willing to sacrifice some land in other areas. If it's going through a certain developer's property, maybe they can substitute some other property in the eastern districts to the point that the lady raised earlier. If we're going through some of the mangrove wetlands, maybe there are other areas that can be not swapped, because just to what my dear friend Woody said here, we don't want to get into another NRA agreement. But, you know, has any of the stakeholders been engaged to say, well, we're going to be going through your property. Do you have other property, just to try and mitigate some of that? But I just cannot see how, if I was a decision maker, how would I make a decision based just on what's being presented here?
Right, but obviously tonight's meeting is specifically 100% about the environmental impact assessment terms of reference. Obviously, that's 100%
Correct,
what we're
but
here for.
we're here because of the road.
Obviously, and that maybe the National Roads
Maybe
Authority
that's a
can speak to
question
that.
for the
Yes.
Okay, the environmental impact assessment doesn't only deal with the environment. The socioeconomic part is a big component to it. Pardon? It is a big component. It's part. It was part of the scoping opinion. It's within the directives for EIs. The cultural, pardon?
Saying it's big, but we have nothing to say to show that it's big.
I'm sorry.
Well, I'm
All right.
here.
What I'm saying is, what you're telling us
Yep.
is completely different from what you're presenting to us. You're telling us the social economic aspect of it is a big part of this assessment. You're not showing that to us here tonight in any way, shape, or form.
Well, we're just starting this. We put together a terms of reference to understand what it is that we need to study in this document. And I think we're hearing that there are a mix of opinions and what people value. And socioeconomics, quality of life, travel time is a big component. And there are also people concerned about the wetlands and how to best mitigate those. So hopefully we can all come together with this compromise. I deal with only socioeconomics. I never get this much attention, so thank you. Usually it's all the environmental people.
We really, believe me, we want to help this process along, but in terms of that road, what percentage of the central mangrove wetland does it represent? Because, I mean, my eyes could be deceiving me, but that line in relation to the 6,500 and something acres seems relatively insignificant. So the road, how much of the actual wetland loss are we talking about?
Yeah.
You know, that's something that we're going to be quantifying exactly during the EIA process. I believe, you know, the scoping opinion noted that approximately 174 acres were going to be impacted, but that was just a preliminary number that was created based off of the corridor. And like we were saying, there's indirect and cumulative impacts. So you have to take into effect the hydrology of it. If you split an ecosystem in half, that can have detrimental impacts to the entire system as a whole. And that really kind of creates a trickle-down effect to the socioeconomics too. So it all plays a hand in the entire process.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Coming to you.
Good evening. This is a project which is looking long-term into the future over 30, 40, 50 years, and quite rightly so. The way people are being moved about in the world is going to change in that time. What considerations are being given to other ways of moving people about other than cars, which would be more efficient and more environmentally friendly?
That's you guys. I don't think it's EIA.
Yeah, thank you for the question. We did touch on it a little earlier. So, the world is talking about going green and so forth. So sometimes it's, I don't imagine we'll have flying cars anytime soon, but it's, people are talking, natural gas vehicles, electric vehicles, all these types of things. But also going green also means adapting your corridors then to allow for public transport, cycling for those who want to do that. Those types of things. We're seeing a lot of the sort of the small, like I can never find the right term for them, but this e-scooters and those sorts of things. Those types of things will become important, for example, when we start to say restrict the number of cars on the island. If that's the direction that the government goes in, then as the population grows and you're restricted to the use of a vehicle, you have the option of doing public transport if the government think seriously about that, or you're actually seeing it now where more people are cycling, more people are doing e-scooters. That creates another set of problems, and that's one of the reasons why you actually need a properly designed corridor wide enough that you can provide dedicated spaces for those types of transportation. So if you're just trying to squeeze into Bordentown Road and Shamrock Road, how are you going to be able to accommodate public transport, motor vehicles, scooters, bicycles, all that stuff? So you need that wide corridor that you can create those avenues for those who want to walk, those who want to ride a bicycle, those sort of things. So that's one of the more reasons why we at the NRA are really saying that you have to consider the many facets or multi-uses of the corridor. It's not, as Lindsay said, 6 or 8 lanes of traffic. God forbid that we ever do that. We don't want to go that direction. But we will have the space to innovate and to be able to include greener types of transport in the future.
I believe this lady was next. Coming to
Hi,
you
good
guys.
evening. I just kind of wanted to talk a bit about the observations I made in the meeting tonight, my concerns as well. I did my research a little bit before showing up today because I knew I was coming to this meeting, and I'm a little bit younger and I don't have the historical knowledge of the effects necessarily that happened in '88 or happened, and I was probably 6 years old. So I really tried to understand a little bit more about the history of this proposal. I think it's one thing to consider that although I feel all of the points and questions were quite valid so far, to just circle back to the fact that our consultants here and the NRA aren't the decision makers when it comes to this. And the point where we should be asking these amazing questions that we're asking are to our representatives, are before elections, are every single day we can reach out to these cabinet members. And when the question about metrics is being thrown back at us, the ball is being put in our court, picking up the ball and telling them, as we have so far, that people getting their children ready in traffic is a huge concern, that people feeding their children in traffic is a huge concern. People never seeing the light of day in traffic, leaving at 4 a.m., coming home at 9 p.m. is a huge concern. I know that on my way here, I had mixed feelings about what I was going to hear tonight. I stopped by to pick up some food, and I actually saw a young mother come in with her kids in the restaurant. And she saw someone that she recognized, and it seemed to me like they were chatting a bit about using the bus and the struggles with the bus. And this young mother had 3 kids, all looked to be under the age of 5 years old. It seemed her and her husband shared one car. She was trying to go to school at ICCI. She lives in Frank Sound. And she had to choose between picking up her kid from school when they were sick and making it to class on time. I just hope that the decision makers in the room, listen to things like that. Yeah, they're gone. But I hope that they listen to the things like that. I hope they hear those conversations. I hope they hear what we've had to say tonight. And hopefully, I mean, you guys have thick skin, but hopefully that things like that are taken into consideration. We're not just addressing people who actually have the privilege of having a car to come to this meeting tonight, but also those who aren't able to make it, those who work night shifts, those who can only grocery shop after 7 p.m. on a Saturday. And in addition to that, I know I showed up here today and saw, I think it was our young representatives for plastic free. And I think if I hadn't had made that stop to get my little snack before I came here, I would have probably been 100% on board with that. But if there's anything that nature shows us in general, and I'm not very like touchy-feely about nature and whatever, but if there's anything nature shows us in general, is that we do need balance. And I hope that whatever is actually approved by the decision makers incurs balance. I think one of my favorite points tonight was from the lady in the far section over there. Things that would incentivize developing in the Eastern districts, like stamp duty breaks for Caymanians in the Eastern districts, things like protecting the areas that would surround the developing road, moratorium on building in those areas, and incentivizing the people who own that land for what they would have lost. There are creative solutions out there that I think we all are capable of putting our 2 cents into, because all our perspectives are very valued. And I don't know what you're going through, and you don't know what I'm going through, but it seems like to live in the Eastern districts, you'd be going through a lot right now. So
Thank you.
yeah.
Thank you very much. And you're absolutely correct. We live in one of the best democracies in the world, where that we can all pick up our phone and talk to our members of parliament. They're all willing to listen to us. That is something special, and we should keep hold of that. Mr. Billy in the back, please. There's a couple still here in our house right here tonight. Just okay. Mr. Billy, sir. You're ready, sir. You're on.
Yeah, okay. No, I just let Mr. Arden finish. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. It's interesting to note that we started here with about 130 people, and we had 45 online. When I last checked, of course, that's when I had data, because you know, this whole mobile data thing doesn't work the way it should. We had 91 online. So that's over 200 people for 3 hours. That's 600 man hours, indicating an interest in what's going on here tonight, which is very good for Cayman. You know, when we look at what is being proposed here, and the big fear, as I mentioned in Northside, is that there are multiple roundabouts where you actually only have T's in the road. And we know who owns most of the land to the north. We know the types of developments that go in. In the EIA draft that's there, they talk about canals and what goes into canals. There's a rule of physics that what goes up must come down, including the Chinese balloon. And there's also another rule that what you flush down your toilet today, this morning, after your breakfast, does not stay down there. What you flush comes out. And that comes out into the sea. The sea is shared by people, by coral. Coral from which we get sand. I don't love the environment. I love what the environment does for me. Very all self-interested, I'm saying, because what I get out of it. We are killing the sand-producing corals because of untreated sewage. Even the one that comes out of the Water Authority, you talk about the standards that are used in your draft. What you do not say is looking at what some of those standards should be. Sewage. Hey, how you doing, buddy? Right now, would you agree or disagree that sewage standards are following what is now known as the best conventional technology? Would you agree or disagree with that? Advanced wastewater treatment.
I'm not
Anybody?
sure that's part of the CIA.
Up on the panel.
It's not part of the EIA remit, sir.
Yes, sir. The sewage and what goes on is listed in the draft.
Is it?
It's listed about the water authority's responsibility for outflows. They also, in the draft, talked about the effect of canals and what comes out of canals and goes into the sea. Very much part of it, sir, on subject. But however, if nobody wants to answer it, I can understand it. Because our standards for sewage is what was used back in the 70s worldwide. And we now know that that is not adequate. It results in what we have at the southern end of the beach. We've killed the coral. We have no sand for about nearly the first mile. And again, looking at income. If we don't have the sandbar in the North Sound because we fill the coral, look at the reef just to the north and the northeast coming through that channel, and it looks like it looked the concentration camps when they went there in Germany and Poland after the end of the Second World War. All these bones, the dead coral. And if we don't put new sand continually on that, coming in through the reef there, we will lose the sandbar. That's money to the country. That's the economy. That's all part of the socioeconomic studies, sir. Very much on target. And therefore, the treatment of sewage water and looking at what other territories that are beach-orientated, such as the Florida Keys, are taking out and closing down on the 70 keys, each and every private septic system, and all going to municipal septic systems. Key West being the first, $80 million, completed it for the first in March of last year. Stormwater drainage used to be combined in many territories with sewage, no longer. The handling of stormwater drainage to be sure you're not getting these things into the water. So are we going to be adding that in there? A quick question that I'd like at this point is, can you tell me between 11:30 in the day, rush hour is over, how much time will be saved to travel from East End to the center of Georgetown and from Northside Civic Center to the center of Georgia, or any point in Northside? Does anybody have a ready answer as to how much time will be saved at that time? Also, during the rush hour, from 6 in the morning to 9 in the morning, and from 3:30, 4 o'clock to 6 or 7 o'clock at night, how much time is going to be saved going the other way? If you don't have the answer, that's fine.
We might. I think we've had a couple.
Yeah, you can, whoever it is can answer it. You want me? I'll wait, but I have other questions.
Okay. Let me answer it very quickly. Obviously, there'll be travel time savings, and you can basically, depending on how you design the road and the speed, could vary those travel time savings. But it's a little bit more than that. You have to consider. We also look at collision data in terms of from a safety aspect. So a highway, and most people don't know this or realize this, a divided highway is much more safer than the type of roadway that we have now. And that's because there's not all these what we call side friction. So there's not all these driveways and so forth. So that's the issue that a lot of people are ignoring or not realizing in that sense. So it's not just travel time savings, it's also safety in terms of eliminating those conflicts.
Yeah, so I thank you for that.
Mr. Miller, hold on. I think we do have some other comments.
Including head-on collisions. So once you have a divided highway, the potential for head-on collision is greatly minimized. Yeah.
And I think if I may add on to what Edward had said, when you look at travel time, you look at it from like an optimal condition, like you said, 11:30, during the day or, in the middle of the day versus, 7 o'clock in the morning. When you look at things from a quality of life perspective, you also want to look at the differential between free flow conditions when it's not congested and when it is congested. And they call that travel time reliability. And I think we've heard a lot today about how unreliable that travel time really is. That, there's a big difference between the rush hour travel time and then the off-peak travel time. And we've also heard about what happens when there are incidents, right? It's not reliable, not just because there's congestion, but I would imagine that if there's an incident that happens at 11:30 in the morning, once rush hour is over, it's still going to very negatively impact people's travel time. And so the reliable route that Edward was mentioning that's going to improve safety is also going to likely improve travel time reliability because there'll be multiple routes that people can use.
Yes.
And so then you wouldn't be in a situation where there's an accident or there's an ambulance on the road and people can't get around it because they just have 2 lanes to go on right now.
Yeah.
So when we look at transportation and the socioeconomic impacts, those are the types of things we're looking at. So it's more of a holistic view of things.
Yeah. So, Mr. Billy, I would add one more thing too, and I would say, let me pick a spot. So let's pick Peace Bay, somewhere near Meager Bay Pond. Or if you have a fatality at 11 o'clock in the day, you know what the police are going to do, right? They're going to shut down the road for hours while they do the investigation. So imagine hours, that road being impassable for hours and so forth. And that's what I'm saying is like the potential for serious accidents, including fatalities, is much, much greater on the type of roadways that we have now. And as the population grows and as you get more traffic and more of these, people coming out of driveways and so forth, and it's just going to get worse. It's going to get a whole lot worse.
Sorry, sir. Neither one of the answers answered my question. I said under optimal conditions, no accidents, no storm, no flooding.
Yeah.
What would be the difference in time during rush hour and what would be the time at off hours?
Okay, sure. I can
just
answer that.
no, nothing stop. I understand the alternate route. I understand the multiple points of entry, which is also something which is indicative of Cayman, in that depends who asks for the right to come off the highway is who gets it.
Yeah.
You know how the corruption goes. So from Hearst Road,
Billy, we're trying to answer the question and we're close on time, please. So let's
let me answer very quickly
with a response.
Because it sounds like you're looking for a number.
Yes.
So if I drove from Old Man Bay, let's just say from Jack's gas station in Northside, from Frank Sound, if I drove from there, and Google Maps can tell you can actually punch it into Google Maps, and I drove into the government administration building, that will currently take you about 33 minutes at 11 o'clock in the day, off peak, right? If you try to do that in the morning, and are there any East and Northsiders here? They can tell you what that is, right? That's hour and a half. So in fact, I have it here. Let me give it to you because someone just sent me a message. I will pull it up in a second and let you know what it is.
And Mr. Billy, just so you know, we do have other questions and we're getting close to 9 o'clock. So if you just have one more question, sir, then we can move on.
It says, good morning, sir. I thought I would share an experiment that I tried this morning. I left my house in Northside at 5:45 a.m. To see how the traffic is for persons at that time. I normally don't leave at that time. When I got to the Black Urchin Hotel, in Peace Bay, it was 6:06. So 5:45 from Northside to Black Urchin Hotel, 6:06 a.m. And traffic was at a standstill at Black Urchin Hotel.
Wow.
I made it to Tall Tree in Savannah at 7:15 a.m. So that's from Black Urchin Hotel in Peace Bay at 6:06 a.m. It took him an hour and change to get to Tall Tree.
And then from Tall Tree,
Yeah. But he didn't give numbers for
didn't.
that. But he said, I just gave
In
up.
other
He said, I
words,
gave up.
those are the numbers.
You know,
Those are the numbers
those are the
that
numbers.
I think it would be good if you told the people,
Yeah.
so that we know whether at the end of the day it is fit for purpose. I want to know what your objective, measurable objectives are.
Okay.
Not pie in the sky.
Right. So,
And then tell me what the difference in time going to be after this road goes in.
yes, yeah.
Thank you, Mr.
In fact, Mr. Billy, we actually can, our model can tell you that on a whole. And then what we would do is the volume of vehicles, what we do is we put a number. So all of us work, right? And what we do, we look at what we call the loss of productivity. So for every hour that you're stuck in traffic, that has some value, right?
Yeah.
So typically from what I looked at from the census in terms of, or what we make our hourly wage is somewhere around $24 an hour or something like that. So take $24 an hour, multiply it by the amount of hours that you spent in traffic, multiplied by the population, and that's where you get that millions, what we talk loss of productivity, and that's now. And then when you multiply that, forecast that into the future, you're looking at somewhere, like $500 million a year in lost productivity.
Yeah, you talked about lost hours of productivity as well. It was on the Tuesday night. And I forgot what that
Tuesday
figure
night,
was.
yeah.
I forgot what the figure was, but it was like 10 million.
Mr. Thompson addressed the problem of the multiple on and offs. From Hirsch Road to the first roundabout, 1.1 miles currently has over 20 on and offs. And that's what's going to slow you down. Because when people who support certain politicians come and they're doing their development to the north and south, ask for it, then it's going to twist and they're going to get the right of way. On that stretch alone, where they have a turning off, there's been a death right at the end of one corner. And there's a memorial there right now. And the dangerousness of that, because we lose the effect, that's what Mr. Thompson's talking about, of having a highway. Because every time you stop and start traffic, it's a caterpillar effect. It bunches up on top of one another and then it spreads out, bunches up and spreads out. That's part of our problem. Lack of discipline, lack of sticking to plans, lack of following laws. That's our problem at Gimmer.
Thank you, Mr. Billy. Thank you for your comments. And of course, we also encourage you to send your emails to doe@gov.ky on all of these things. We have one more? Yes.
Hello, good evening. I came to the meeting late, so I'll keep this short because I know everybody probably wants to get home. I just have a couple quick questions. What happens if this doesn't go as planned and traffic continues to build up even with this road? Now we are stuck with this road through a central mangrove wetland. Somewhere I think should be national park. Every country, well, many countries in the world are going the opposite way and trying to conserve land for tourism. We all have kids. My kids want to grow up one day to have national parks to go and enjoy nature. And with this, it's no guarantee. So once it's built, like the port, when everyone was pushing for the port, let's get the port, let's get this, it's going to be great. COVID hit, no port. Now everybody's like, thank God, because the cruise ships they pulled out like that. Now with this road, once that's built, that's it. So there's no guarantee that this will even work. And once it's there, it's there. And my kids, my friends' kids, they're going to grow up and say, what is this road doing? Instead of looking the other side, how can we alternatively, like the gentleman said earlier, figure out ways to decongest the traffic? The amount of cars that are shipped each year into Cayman is staggering. It's insane. And there's no laws for that. Population control. What is government thinking? They're just trying to band-aid it with the road through a natural mangrove wetland, the biggest in the Caribbean. It's just, to me, it's almost disgusting for the country. There are other ways to do it. I understand people have congestion. My mom and my stepdad live in the eastern districts. But there's no guarantee that this road will work. And when the population rises and there is traffic, what do? Build another road? I'm just trying to figure out where we're going with this. Like, it's just like the port. It's similar to the port. And that's just my 2 cents.
Thank you.
I was trying to decide whether to answer it or not. I think because you missed the discussion earlier, possibly. Yeah, okay, so we were talking, exactly. So we were talking more generally in terms of Yeah, so I will say this, that to say that this road would be sort of not fit for purpose or none is categorically not correct. So we gave reasons earlier, and I think I don't want to get back into all of them because it would take me another couple of minutes to explain all of the different uses of the road, because we covered that earlier. But I also premised my argument by saying that it has to do with the way we develop as well. So we have to decide how we develop and how we shift, how land use will drive a lot of this and stuff. And I think Melanie made a good point as well too, that the road could essentially become a sort of there's different ways it could become a road through it. There's many cases where roads are built through nature preserves and they have different functions and so forth. So yeah, I'm rushing my answer because it's late, but we did cover a lot of what you said.
And you have one last quick question, ma'am? Yeah. Just one quick, oh, sir, excuse me, I apologize.
Yeah.
So the greenhouse emissions stated in the report here talks about the
Thank you.
the
Yeah,
greenhouse
sorry, go ahead. I want to hear this young man.
emissions that is talked about in the report here talks about the tailpipe emissions that come from the construction vehicles that will be acting on the construction of the road, correct? I'm wondering whether the report and the study that you will be doing will also include the tailpipe emissions that will be coming from cars in the rush hour mornings and evenings and even throughout the day, 5 days a week, that are affecting the people on the road, their children,
Yes,
every day.
Yes, absolutely.
Great
Absolutely.
question.
And remember now, we talked about going green, right? So the world is going green. So these are policies that government could make. What kind of incentives can they make for people in Cayman to drive more electric vehicles and other stuff? So that's all a part of the whole landscape, right? So don't assume that in 20 years' time we'll all be driving gas guzzlers. That's the point, you see. Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming out this evening, having these two meetings here and Northside. You just have a comment, Woody, or we're well in overtime, as you would say on your show.
No, the question is, and I think a former member of cabinet brought it up, that we are not privy to, and the workings and the mechanisms of cabinet, which was with Mr. McLean, and then Mr. Jackson, whom many would revere as a predominant force in legalese in terms of planning and development law. I got to ask Miss Gina, having the information we now have, because I didn't understand this was actually gazetted back in 2005, I think maybe many persons here was just as surprised as I was, because a lot of things we don't look at a gazette. Having said that, can cabinet, to Mr. Arden's point, completely ignore this whole entire process because the ultimate decision comes down to them? I would say kind of like what a CPA did some time ago with the NCC, that says, look, we can take your advice, but we don't have to follow it. Is that a real circumstance? Because to Mr. Arden's point, this is all into futility then.
So I'll try to answer the question. The cabinet, at the end of this process, the cabinet will have a document called an environmental statement that will summarize the outcome. Yes, absolutely. They can take the information and decide that there is some other overriding public concern that is worth more, but I think that the benefit of doing the
Please let her finish. Well, thank you.
The benefit of doing the EIA is that you, the public, will also have all of the information that they have, because the environmental statement in a draft form will be out for public consultation as well. So that's another phase of the EIA. When the consultants have done their studies and they have assessed the impacts, then they will summarize all of that information in an environmental statement that draft environmental statement will come to the public as well. And they will then be able to, the public, you will be able to see, along with the Environmental Assessment Board and Cabinet, what the effects of the road will be. So, yes, there is a requirement in the National Conservation Law for all documentation involved in the environmental impact assessment to be made public.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Ebanks-Petrie. Appreciate it. And once again, we really appreciate your involvement here this evening. This is what a true democracy is all about, listening to what the people have to say. Please make sure you submit make your submissions before February 20th via email at doe.gov.ky. Thank you all for attendance, and have a good evening. Drive safely.